Hi guys, Mrs. Horman again. Um, we have now finished our um, late Europe and Americas, which has taken us in Europe and America up through 1980. So our next unit takes us to the Pacific region of the world, Micronesia, Polynesia, that sort of thing. And if you look at the slide, it starts in the year 700 and takes us up all the way through 1980. And so at this point, once we do this unit, all of the areas of the world will have been accomplished up through 1980. And then the final unit of the year is contemporary, which is art from around the world everywhere since 1980, because now we're in contemporary. A reminder that this unit, the Pacific, and the next unit, contemporary, will not be on the AP exam. However, I still think that it's really important that I teach it because when you go to college or you take, some sort of art history survey in your future or something like that, the expectation will be that you know these pieces up through, I think our last piece that we do is 2015. So we really want to make sure that you do have that fully comprehensive knowledge of art. And so even though West and Central Asia, Southeast Asia, the Pacific, and contemporary, global contemporary will not be on the AP exam, I'm still going to teach them. So that being said, let us start our first unit for marking period 4 with this piece called Madol. And Madol is in Phnom Micronesia, and it was built by the Sodalur dynasty. And a lot of us are not really good with our geography of that area of the world. So I'm going to scooch forward a little bit and give you an idea of where this is. So when you're looking, you've got this area here. Here's Australia. Here's the edge of Asia. Okay, and then you zoom in a little closer, and here's Australia, and here's Papua New Guinea, okay? And here's Micronesia, and this is where Madol is. And so when you see this little hook on the edge of Papua New Guinea, and then you see this little hook on the edge of Papua New Guinea, this gives you an idea of where Micronesia is. And then this little orange one here, Phnom, that is where Madol is. So it is a very teeny, tiny little thing just off the northeast tip of Australia. So let's go back to, let's go back to our image. So what we have here is a huge complex. And when I say huge complex, I'm not exaggerating. We're looking at 170 acres. And remember, whenever I try to put this into perspective for you, I always try to tell you that if you have any friends that live off sweepstakes, those plots of land are roughly 1/4 of an acre. So, excuse me, that's a yawn. So you take your 170 and you multiply it by 4. And that gives you roughly how many houses off of sweepstakes the yards that is. And it's almost 700. So that's a lot of sweepstakes houses. What you're looking at is a complex of 170 acres that is made up of 100 artificial islands. And so here's the deal with Madol. It is often called the Venice of Asia, or the Venice of Micronesia, or the Venice of the Pacific. And that is because, like Venice, Italy, which is all little tiny man-made islands that are connected by canals, so is Madol. It is a complex that stretches over those 170 acres, made up of over 100 artificial islands. And you're looking at a complex that was created to be the capital of the Sodalur dynasty from its construction in 700 up through the end of the dynasty in 1628. So this area of the world was run by the Sodalur dynasty, and this is where they had their capital. A couple of crazy things to sort of think about. And when I say crazy, I mean to us, not to them. When you look at what you have there, that is a wall to keep the water out. It's a water break. It's to keep the water out there in the ocean from coming into their little islands. And you can see that the walls, it range from between 18 and 25 feet high, and the walls themselves are 38 feet thick. And they are made up of, when you look at this, basalt boulders and prismatic columns. And so when you look, you can see that there are these, what look like sticks going this way, and then the ends of sticks pointing out. Again, edges of sticks here, edges of sticks here, except they're not sticks. Again, it looks like edges of sticks, edges of sticks. But what they are naturally occurring pieces of basalt that break into naturally occurring these columns. And so they can use them like logs of wood, but they're stone, and they're very hardy and they're very strong, and they are naturally occurring in this sort of cylindrical shape. If you guys know anything about Northern Ireland has an area called the Giant's Causeway that also has sort of these odd cylindrical stone shapes that naturally occur. So what you're looking at here, and the reason I like this better, is you can really see the edges of the walls here. You can see where they have cut windows in the edges of these walls to be able to look out onto the more open ocean water. And you get that this is a complex. Now, this is your picture from the College Board. And so here you get your wall, your open water out here, and you get the ruins of a house. And the outside edges possibly of a garden. Okay, and it looks small, but remember please that this wall is 25 feet high. Okay, and so, and Madol translates in Micronesian to the space between. And what that refers to is the water in the canals between the islands. And so you're looking at the area that was the ceremonial capital, the ceremonial seat of the Sodalur dynasty. At the time of the height of its population, it was 25,000 people that lived there in the dynasty. And 1,000 of those people lived here in the Madol complex. The wealthiest people, the people of stature, people in the court of the king, and that sort of thing. And so you're looking at a city that is built of artificial islands. And so I'm going to go forward and show you this. And so here you see the actual island that it butts up against. Then you see these walls that they constructed that are called breakwaters. Their job is to break the water, keep the water from coming into like the big ocean water and waves and stuff like that. It creates like a naturally occurring lagoon. So this water in here is still, and this is where the big waves are out here. And you can see that they created these large platforms and they built houses on them. And so there are these little tiny artificial islands that are connected by canals. But here's the thing that's really, really crazy about them. And when I say crazy, I really do mean crazy. I want you to think about where this is. This is all saltwater. We're in the Pacific Ocean here, right? So we break the Pacific Ocean. We build our thing here up against the edge of the island, but the majority of us live out here on these little pieces, right? This is saltwater. So what you have is a collection of your most important people in your dynasty living in this little tiny community, which is one of the earliest examples of social stratification. What is social stratification, Mrs. Herman? And let me say, one of the earliest examples of social stratification in the Pacific. social stratification is where we separate people based on their social class. And so what we have here is the social hierarchy where all of the wealthy, rich, important people live in the Madol complex, and the air quotes regular people live on the islands. But what's really crazy about this is that this is all saltwater, and they're all man-made islands. So they are completely 100% dependent upon the air quotes again, regular people who live on the island to get them stuff. It's an odd way to separate yourself from your people, because you are entirely relying on them for fresh water, for food, for the construction of boats, any of those sort of things. That everything is completely coming from that island that they have Button and Madol up against. So when you're looking at the walls at that breakwater, you're looking at that the walls point upward and inward. And what's really cool about them is they point upward and inward. And this is a really great picture of it. They look like a boat. Looks like the front edge of a boat. Again, getting all of this water imagery. So these little tiny islands were constructed in the 700s. Large form architecture was built in the 1100s. And its job was to separate the noble people, the wealthy people, the people of power from the common man. There was a royal mortuary compound found just on the island off of the coast of Madol. So just in here was the royal mortuary. You can see it marked there. And so they really were completely isolated and needed to rely on their regular people who were happy to help the royal people because they took care of them. What's cool is we also see that these little islands that were constructed were also then separated further into purpose. There were a couple of islands whose purpose was for food preparation, a couple of islands whose purpose was for canoe buildings, a couple that were for processing of coconuts into the meat, the milk, and oil. So how do we know all of these things? While Madol was not a society that had a written language, they had a very, very robust oral tradition. And so the history of Madol and the social stratification and how they all came to work together was passed down through oral tradition. And so it's a really, really cool complex. And then the Settler dynasty was sort of in the 17th century became sort of a victim of colonization, and it was abandoned. So then that leads us to our next piece here in Oceania, which is probably our most famous piece in all of the Pacific. And most of you probably have seen these at some point if you've seen Night at the Museum. So these are called moai. And the moai are the name of the people. And the ahu is the name of the platform on which they stand. There are lots of really cool things to think about when we deal with Easter Island. And it's really important that you realize that Easter Island is sort of the colonial name given to it by the people that sort of came to Easter Island and were like, look what we discovered. Meanwhile, there was like a whole group of people that were already there. They call themselves Rapa Nui. So their civilization flourished here from 1100 to about 1600. And we're looking at volcanic tufa. And so we've seen some pieces that were made out of that in Rome near Pompeii and stuff like that. And they sit on a basalt base. Why a basalt base? Because it's really solid. And we're looking at a total of 887 statues, that the tallest one is 33 feet high. And the head is always 3/8 of the height. And it is that sort of like, you can compare that a little bit to Polykleitos in the canon of proportions, because there's a very specific calculation for how big the head of the moai has to be in relationship to its total height. So It's made from the base, that basalt base on which it sits is made from basalt, but it also acts as a kind of like the Ludovisi battle sarcophagus or the column of Trajan. It functions as a place to put cremated remains. So there are ashes of cremations underneath that basalt of the ahu, of the platform that the Easter Island moai sit on, the Rapa Nui moai sit on. The top knot that you see here, this red top knot, is indicative of the chieftains, the Pukawa. It shows that they are the most senior people that are there. Now, Christianity and colonization comes here in 1860, but the majority of the Rapa Nui civilization had come to a halt. There were very few people living here on Rapa Nui, even when the British showed up, and that there are many reasons why that is, but the most commonly believed reason for the downfall of Rapa Nui is the most common reason for the downfall of Rapa Nui is was actually the overuse of trees. It is firmly believed that the people of Rapa Nui caused their island ecology to tip out of balance. Because these pieces are so large, and when you're looking at 82 tons, because these pieces are so large, they carved them straight into the stone in the ground. And then, they would carve the faces and the sides and the ears, and they would carve down and down and down, and eventually they would carve so that the moai was free in that little hole that was there, and then they would bring it out of its hole and bring it down to the edge of the island and prop it up on the ahu. Well, how do you move 82-ton things? Well, you put them on log rollers, and you use log rollers to act as sort of like a ball bearings or like a caterpillar type machinery to move these things from one part of the island to another. And so what you're looking at is an island where basically construction destroyed their ecosystem and the people had to leave. There are a ton of, that's an incorrect word. There are several hundred moai statues that remain in the quarry, still buried in the ground, because by the time they had used up all of their ecological necessities, like trees that brought them, coconuts and other things like that, and birds that they could then eat, they left many of them still in the ground. They didn't have enough resources to move them. One of the things that is interesting about them is the majority of people are used to seeing them kind of like this. Okay. What people don't realize is that many of them have very distinct carvings on them. These have been restored so that you can go and see them. But this red here on the top knot and in the red in the center of the eye, and then the white in the eye, they would have been painted, and they would have been made from a material that was made from a ground red stone that was mixed in sort of like a paste and applied to the larger figure. So you see that they have this distinct marking. They also have very clear markings on the back of them that become almost impossible to see after they've been after they've been standing for any length of time, because they're so weathered by the salt water and wind and sand and things like that. So many of the markings on them disappear very very quickly. They believed, the people of Rapa Nui believed that they were a repository for the sacred spirit of their religion. There is a belief that they were part of what is called the bird cult, and that there were men who annually had to accomplish basically these almost Olympic style physical feats to prove themselves to be the most important, most physically fit, most worthy of the bird god. And so this is very much religiously based for them. And then you see the physical characteristics: very large eyes, okay, very, very long ears. And it's hard sort of on this one to see the long ears, but there you go. Very, very long ears, very, very wide brow. Why? It shows, the brow shows us intelligence, the ears show us wealth. You should absolutely compare these to the Assyrian Lamassu in the way that some of their stuff is created. They have very, very large, broad noses. What most people don't see is that there are actually, and you can see it here, this is an arm that comes down. They have arms that come down on each side, and they go straight down. And then their hands cross just below their navel. It's most of them are worn and it's very difficult to see. But their hands cross just below their navel. And they are a symbol of authority and power, both religious and political. But the oddest thing, I always say this for last, I don't know why, but the oddest thing is that when people think about them, oh, and I should probably show you this. A lot of us don't know where our Easter Island / Rapa Nui is. Here's the coast of South America, and it's off the side here. Now, when you look at this, you can see the ring of trails that you can travel should you go to visit Rapa Nui. And you can see where there are outcroppings of these moai. What most people don't know about them is that when you look at them, they are facing towards you. Most of the time when we see statues, we often think of them as looking out over the ocean to see incoming danger, and that their job is to guard us from incoming danger. That is not their function. They sit with their backs to the sea, looking in on the island to watch over and to protect the people who live on the island. And here you see this, a very clear construction of the hands meeting below the navel, and a basic concept of how tall they are. And so their job is to watch over the island and the people. That's why they look inward. They don't look out to sea and look for people who are coming. They look into the island to let you know that you are being cared for and looked after. So it's a very interesting piece of information about Rapa Nui and the moai that many people do not know. There's a huge controversy currently. The British Museum has one moai who has carvings on the back, and his name is Hohakananaya. And the people of Rapa Nui, people who still live there and have sort of tried to revitalize the civilization, they want him back. He is one of their religious items, and they are much like people in Benin are, well, what is modern day Nigeria, but formerly Benin, want the Benin plaques back. The people from Rapa Nui, they want Hohakananaya back. They want their moai back. So the British Museum has several things that countries are really very angry about, and this is one of them. Okay, our last piece for today is an ahu ula. That's how you say that, ahu ula, which is a feather cape from Hawaii. So hopefully we all know where that is, off the coast of California. And we're looking at late 18th century, made of feathers and fiber. Should remind you Hopefully you're thinking it, you're looking at it, and you're going, wow, that reminds me a little bit of some of the stuff that we did when we did Indigenous America. And I go, good job. So yes, this is an ahu ula. We're looking at feathers. Male nobility wore cloaks and capes for ceremonies and for battle preparation, but not actually into battle. This is a very small cape. It's very, very small, only 27 by 18. There are very few that remain because the materials are very delicate. But the colors, like with the Aztecs, are important. Red is the color of the gods. Yellow is very scarce, and so it is considered a sacred color. And so you're looking at clearly a cape that is incredibly, incredibly important and would have been worn by someone who was of the nobility and probably a chief that they believe was divinely chosen based on the color choice. So coconut fiber, the outside of the coconut, that stuff that you can weave into like a fabric, that is the underlying, and then the feathers are added over top of it. This is a depiction of what some of them would have looked like, very long ones, including headdresses in some places. This is a very short one, kind of a little bit like this one. So your theme here is royalty and exotic materials. This one was given as a gift to the first European sailor who, air quotes, discovered Hawaii. It was then taken back to Europe. I believe it now sits in a museum in Berlin. It passed through several hands, and since it was gifted, but it was actually gifted. It's one of the few pieces that are in a museum that got there in an appropriate way. And so it was taken back to Europe, and it was given as a gift to the monarch that funded some of the early voyages to Hawaii. So it's very complex work. The feathers are very small. And the interesting thing about this is, what you're looking at is a combination of approximately 500,000 feathers. And when you're thinking that birds, like the coatl bird had only, or the quetzal bird only had 7 or 8 feathers, you're looking at needing to create an aviary, a place to keep birds so that they could take their feathers, collect them, pluck them, let them grow back, that sort of thing. It's a huge, huge undertaking. And it is an important spiritual undertaking as well, in that as the capes were being constructed by artisans, the artists, with a blessing from the shaman, would be chanting the history of the ancestors as it was being made, in order to give the ahu ula, the feather cape, a mystical power given to them by the shaman to then speak into the cape. It would have been worn by a helmet. There's a total of only 160 of them that exist in the world. 4 separate bird species were used here. And there's oral tradition passed down of prior to the construction of the aviary, the concept that they actually hunted the birds. And then they sort of figured out, like, wait, we want to keep doing this. So they had to sort of think their way through and how to construct a way to not kill the birds, but keep them so they have more of their feathers. And so, that old thing, necessity is the mother of invention, in wanting to have these feathers, they sort of had to figure out a way to keep these birds alive so that they had a consistent source of them. So the use of feathers, the use of red and gold, the use of the coconut fiber, this is just a quintessentially Pacific item. And we see feather items like this across Micronesia, across Polynesia, like all of these areas of what many art historians call Oceania. And so feathers are a big deal, both with Native Americans in like with the Aztecs and the Incas, but also here with the people of Polynesia. So that is our lesson for today. Another lesson of Pacific with 3 more items for this week, and that'll be what we'll do this week. All right, guys, have a great day, and I will see you later if I can get my escape button to work, which doesn't appear to be wanting to work. I'm trying real hard, friends. You can stop listening to me now. My escape button is not working. All right, and now hopefully we can get it to